talk too much, but I encourage anyone who is interested in viewing his talk, which was recorded, to go to www.thesocialistproject.ca where you can find it. The focal point of the assembly, however, was really about Saturday and Sunday. Although the event was of course open to all, we really wanted to emphasize this was not a flash-in-the-pan event, such as Rebuilding the Left Forum in Toronto in the early 2000s, which brought together over 700 activists, but soon dissipated. That said, as I mentioned earlier, we attempt to invite a representative sample of the community groups, movement activists, labor organizers, union locals, and a select member of praxis-oriented academics. Although approximately about 150 were registered, about 110 actually managed to make it to the event. Among the numerous groups and individuals involved, a short list included people from the CAW, CUPE, Steelworkers, the Elementary Teachers Federation, Teamsters, and various labor councils, community organizations such as the Ontario Coalition Against Poverty, No One is Illegal, Stop the War Coalition, Community Alliance for Social Justice, Justice for Migrant Workers, the Organizing for Justice Conference Committee, Indigenous Peoples Solidarity Movement, London Mobilization for Climate Change, Creative Class Struggle, South Asian Women's Centre, the Ontario Health Coalition, the Canadian Arab Federation, the Socialist Project, the New Socialist Group, Common Cause, and some activist academics from York University, the University of Manitoba, Carleton, the University of Toronto, Ryerson, McMaster, and the Critical Social Research Collaborative. This is by no means an exhaustive list, and I could have probably spent the rest of the time just naming off groups. But in any case, on Saturday, after a general introduction, there was, broadly, a morning and afternoon workshop. The morning workshop was entitled, Our Strengths, Limitations, and Challenges. There were 5 simultaneous workshops with about 15 to 20 people in each session. Groups were pre-assigned with the emphasis on putting union workers into contact with the social justice movements, community organizers with activist academics, etc., and really stressing the need for cross-collaboration. Issues that came up during the talk included, how do we build our collective political capacities in the absence of a fight-back organization? The need for unions to broaden their goals and not remain focused on pay issues and broader challenges to the labor movement. Sustained mobilization efforts, the organization of the right, ensuing tactics and strategy, what separated and united us, where we differed ideologically and politically, the battle over ideas and therefore the need for sustained educationals, and perhaps most importantly, the historic failures of the left coupled with the dynamism of capitalism and neoliberalism. The Saturday afternoon session was on how do we build the afternoon session. This led to discussions which stressed the need to have a physical and intellectual space, building trust among ourselves and learning to work together, the lack of an independent political party or vision, what kind of public campaigns could unite us, what kind of challenges do we face independently and could we work on together. There was also a sentiment that if unions are to reappear as a movement and not simply a relic of the past, they need to move beyond the narrow interests of the workplace and really begin thinking about new strategies, tactics, and present conditions in the form of a broader working class movement across multiple divisions such as race, gender, sexuality, and ability. In other words, a move from the corporate unionism and, more importantly, towards a deeper analysis of capitalism and a critical ideological perspective. Moreover, there was an expectation that union rank-and-file members must demand more from their leaders, and that their leaders should not hesitate to stir debate or internal critique. Some argue that earlier decades of gains have pacified the rank-and-file, leading many of today's workers towards conservatism and away from the historical relationship between unions, social movements, and political parties. The absence of such political and public support for workers' struggles, such as that in Ottawa with striking transit or museum workers, or in Toronto and Windsor with their striking civic workers, suggested that workers get used to lowered expectations. However, the response among assembly participants wasn't simply about raising expectations, but having new and different expectations. In other words, to supersede the redistributive program of third-wave progressivism. Likewise, participants agreed that so long as the ability to transform our lives is left to the devices of markets, competition, and profits, as opposed to democratic social planning to meet collective needs and desires, a society supportive of solidarity and equality will remain an intangible reality. The Saturday session ended with some sectoral meetings and then all groups coming back together to discuss where we're at. After summing up the group discussions, we left with the understanding that the following day, Sunday, we would focus on where do we go from here and what is to be done. Sunday's meeting was only a half-day morning session which sought to address our future aims and plans, if any at all. The discussion revolved around the idea that what was needed was an anti-capitalist movement that was democratic, radical, and ambitious, and needed to be inclusive along all lines and as diverse and representative as possible, with a commitment to meeting again. We had to address the parameters of this organization. Would it be Toronto only, citywide, or stretching the golden horseshoe? What resources do we have access to, and what would we potentially need in the future? As well as activism and education was emphasized as was common communication and a reporting capacity. The insistence was on the local and not replacing action with simply meeting with each other to discuss articles or working on publicity campaigns. Assemblies must be based on acting and learning as we discuss and plan, so that the movement's skills and capacities are broadened and deepened. Many stressed the need to think ambitiously again. The emphasis was to get each of the movements to engage with struggles beyond their particular concerns, and ones they could not do alone. But this wasn't just about broader concerns. It was about coming to terms with the larger ideological, political, economic, and cultural barriers that confront us. It was about bringing local assemblies together as they also inspire new ones to form without losing the strength of their local orientations. It was about the potential for an assembly of assemblies becoming fundamental as we come face to face with the politics of change. Of course, this means that people will have to commit to spending time on this project, which means juggling work and familial demands and taking on new work. Certainly not an easy task. Notwithstanding all this, the meeting adjourned with some common decisions. Most importantly, first, that we would meet again, and second, the need for a steering or continuation committee. Approximately 25 people volunteered, with roughly half representing women and racialized groups. The idea was that the continuation committee would then have various subcommittees or working groups which would bring up questions and tasks that need to be addressed. The working groups would attempt to focus the discussion for the next assembly so that it can be equally productive and continue the momentum. And along the way, develop closer personal relationships. We decided that the next assembly would seek to address who is a member and so who can vote, whether we move on to a permanent steering committee and how it is chosen, with the concern being not to homogenize or give up our own group affiliations, at least not yet. We also spoke about how often we would meet, perhaps every 2 months, and the need for a short defining statement of principles, with a long-term suggestion to produce a constitution in the future. Some of the subcommittees included a solidarity committee that would look at what this means beyond what we normally do with each other and how we could work together. For example, networks of activists in and across unions and social movements. Or, for instance, linking public sector unions with groups facing social service cutbacks, including a potential legal defense fund. A campaign committee that would, a campaign committee that would attempt to go beyond the struggles that exist or emerge sporadically and consider and plan for new initiatives that each of our groups couldn't do on their own. This meant not only consolidating existing groups, but sustained mobilization and outreach with an emphasis on developing new skills, extending our scope, and deepening our commitments. The campaign committee would also seek to develop both short-term strategic campaigns, such as what we could win in the near future, as well as something to build from. Discussion on some common campaigns, such as the citywide mobilization to support immigrant-based struggles, getting rid of temp agencies and replacing them with union hiring halls, the right to adequate housing, environmental issues, taking on P3s and hospital privatizations, educational campaigns, Palestinian rights, opposition to military interventionism and imperialism, etc. Next, an educational committee would work on cadre building, or like our American friends would call it in attendance, cater building. Internal and external educationals around political economy, history, organizing, empire, and colonialism. Outreach, pamphleteering on specific as well as broader issues, from access to public services to larger issues like capitalism, the state and empire, communication and culture. Of course, each working group overlaps, but would also include linking other workers and struggles together with an eye on larger projects for going beyond networks and coalitions to an organization that is socially rooted to building a self-conscious, anti-capitalist force. Many agreed that without some broader coherence to the movements, this fragmented politics leaves us frustratingly marginalized in terms of reversing or reshaping the larger agenda. To conclude, the cost of not having such organizational capacities has become painfully clear during the recent and ongoing crisis of capitalism. However, despite sporadic and localized battles here and there, we weren't able to take advantage of this historical moment. Not yet, at least. Our capacities just weren't there. In fact, capitalism is emerging more powerful and consolidated than ever. It's not hard to figure out who will pay for this crisis, and with our weakness so exposed, there is good reason to expect the right to exploit this situation to its fullest potential. The challenge, I think, is to emphasize how capitalism, even when it seems to be functioning without any in-your-face crises, has become a barrier to human development, self-expression, and is indeed crisis-riddled. By stunting our potential to meet collective needs and desires, restricting our ability to think creatively and in radically different ways, and subjecting 4/5 of the world's population to drudgery, poverty, and a lifetime of insecurity, capitalism robs us of our ability to assert our humanity in whatever ways. Before coming here today, an Equals poll released by the CBC today shows the Conservatives gaining majority with nearly 41% of the vote. Also, news released today from the Carleton Arctic Survey, found that the Arctic will be an open sea during the summer in the next 10 years. While the social and human costs, I'm confident, are well understood here, the scramble for sovereignty and resources, unfortunately, is what begets most media attention. Hopefully this conference will not be an event or a forum, but the initial consulta towards building our own movement with ambitious goals, creative and committed activists coming together. The failure to do so would simply be to accept the existing social relations as unalterable, and would therefore be a recognition, even an admission, of the right of capital to exploit the working class. Thank you.